Good morning and welcome to Fuels Friday. Today we're going to be looking at fuel continuity and fuel structure through the eyes of an ignition specialist. My name is Mike May and I've been managing wildfires with the government of Alberta since 1997. And through this time, I've been in numerous positions from frontline firefighter to incident commander. In 2011, I became a certified ignition specialist. And through the last decade, I've worked many large-scale incidents in this role, kind of helping to manipulate fire fronts, cleaning up fire flanks, and ultimately making easier work for the frontline firefighters who put these fires out. So as we go through the next 5 to 10 minutes, closer to 10, I'm unsure of people's experience, so I think we can all agree that we know fuel continuity, fuel arrangement, and ladder fuels. Some other terms that I'll be using will be incident commander, who is essentially the boss of an incident or a wildfire, the operations section chief, who is responsible for the operations of a wildfire. I'll also be using the terms dozer, which is a piece of heavy equipment. Think bulldozer. It's exactly what it is. And finally, I'll be using the word control line, which is essentially a man-made or natural barrier to fire spread, whether that is a constructed dozer guard or a road. So I'm going to be talking to you about fuel continuity on the ground, horizontally, and vertical arrangement as well, and what that looks like and what we use that for in the eyes of an ignition specialist. So on a wildfire, when I'm asked to conduct a mission, the first thing I do, time permitting, is to fly out to the site where I'm going to be working, get out of the helicopter, and do a walkthrough. So what I'm doing here is I'm looking at the surface fuels. Is there a bunch of fine fuels that are going to help generate whatever fire I push down to get it going? Is there also a large component of dead and down fuels on the ground? And how are they so arranged? Is that going to be enough to carry that fire through the stand of timber? Are there ladder fuels? And if there are, is there enough to get those fires from the ground up into the crowns of the trees? So once I've satisfied these questions through the walkthrough, my job is to then come up with a plan to achieve the desired results, hopefully. Many times the incident commander or the operations section chief are looking for full consumption of fuels, thus alleviating the risk of future issues. If the fuel continuity is not there, we do have ways to manipulate it, whether that's utilizing various types of ignition devices or by employing mechanical tactics on the ground. Example, if the incident commander wants full crown consumption, but there is a lack of surface fuel and or ladder fuel, we can utilize the helitorch. And this will essentially drop flaming gelled fuel directly onto the tree's canopy, initiating a crown fire that can then move independently crown to crown through the stand of timber. On the reverse of that, if the boss or the incident commander wants just the surface fuel removed, for whatever reason, we have the ability to switch to our PSD, or plastic sphere dispenser, which will drop ping pong ball filled with potassium permanganate and injected with glycol. Once injected, this ping pong ball will catch fire through a chemical reaction between the potassium permanganate and the glycol about 20 to 30 seconds later. This time delay allows enough time for the ping pong ball to fall from the helicopter, penetrate the forest canopy, hit the ground, start a fire, and when it starts the fire, it's going to be a less intense fire and require a lot more work and energy to get up into the crowns. There are also many ways that we can manipulate the fuel continuity through tactics on the ground. I'm just going to share my screen and kind of show you, hopefully. There we go. I'm going to annotate. So what we do here, if we want to start a fire on a wildfire, and say our job is to burn out from, here's our control line, here's our main fire, and the wind is blowing from the control line to the main fire. So we want to remove all the fuels in between. If for example, there is not a lot of fuels or it's very sparse on the inside edge of our control line, we get our dozers to essentially push down all the fuel from the control line into the direction of the fire. And then we might even get them to walk down a couple swaths of fuel on the ground on the inside edge of the control line. Now, when we come in with our helicopter and drop either ping pong balls or gel fuel, it's going to hit this fuel that's we've created on the ground, and hopefully that's enough to get it going and up into the canopies of the standing timber. So on the reverse side of this, if we have, pardon me, if we have our control line here, main fire's here, and the wind is blowing adversely, or from the main fire to the control line, there's obviously a greater risk of that fire to jump the control line and spot across. So what we do here is we'll have the dozer clear all the fuel off the control line and pile it on the outside edge of the control line. And we might even get him to make it a little bit wider as well. And the idea here is this will lessen the fuels on the inside edge of the control line, thus bringing the intensity down as it hits that control line. And then we simply strip down the fire. And as we approach the control line, we will get our strips closer and closer together, thus alleviating the risk of that fire gaining in intensity. And the idea here is to bring it to the control line at a time so that the RH is recovering, the temperature is going down, and the recovery is happening for the overnight period. And if done correctly, that method and bringing it to the control line will actually create a very little headaches for the ground crews going in the day after to clean up and have a look. So those are a couple ways where we can kind of manipulate, either add to or remove some of that fuel continuity on the wildfire. On a prescribed fire, we have the luxury of time, and time is extremely valuable as it provides the prescribed fire planning team lots of time to discuss the desired outcome with the ignition specialist. And once these discussions are held, then the team can get to work manipulating the fuel structure as required, whether we want to space it or thin it, disrupting the continuity to ultimately reduce the fire intensity, or whether additional fuel is needed to generate a more easily and readily combustible area to help along that ignition process. Notably, on the Evan Thomas prescribed fire I was part of years ago in the Kananaskis country, we were asked to burn off the side of a mountain up into the alpine meadow. There were three goals for this prescribed fire. One, to improve the sheep grazing habitat in the alpine meadow. Two, to build a capping unit for the Evan Thomas recreation area. And three, to test out a fuel modification, which consisted of crews and machinery going in the year previous and cutting about 10-meter wide swaths of fuel up and across the mountainside. This fuel was then piled and kind of windrowed along, thus to help this fire when lit to build intensity and to help that fire up the slope. The vegetation on the slope was pine with very little understory, and there was little chance without this fuel modification of getting that fire to carry up the slope without the treatment plan. On a similar slope, same aspect, same vegetation, prescribed fire was attempted years previous, resulting in very spotty burn, meaning lots of follow-up work, for the ground crews. So in the eyes of the ignition specialists, fuel structure can be advantageous or it can be a hindrance, depending on the circumstance and the desired outcome. If there's a lack of fuel continuity on the ground, or the latter fuels vertically, then the amount of time and energy to achieve a desired result may take longer and require greater efforts. In doing so, this creates an additional issue in terms of timing for the mission, because it's important to realize that once you plan on burning something in Mother Nature, then you need to do it as soon as you can and get it wrapped up as quickly as you possible. This alleviates the chances of conditions worsening, whether the wind changes, whether precipitation is coming, or whether you're simply losing the sun. Essentially, when more time is required, there's more opportunity for conditions to change for the worse. On wildfires, I don't put a lot of science into it sometimes, because if I look and the main fire is burning really well, I know no matter what I put down there, it's going to burn equally as well as the main fire. On the prescribed fire, there's obviously a lot more planning involved so we can get the conditions just right to achieve the desired outcomes. So I guess in closing, yes, me as an ignition specialist certainly look at fuel continuity. I try to pick areas that have a good amount of fuel continuity out there and fuel load. But if there isn't, it's not the end all be all, because we do have tools that we can manipulate the environment of which that fire behaves. So hopefully you enjoyed the short little presentation and enjoy the rest of the presentations. Thanks. Goodbye.